Hi everyone, this is Chapter 9, Pollen and Beck lesson on quantitative research design. Some of it should be a refresher as you should have taken, research in your RN to BSN program. Remembering that when we discuss the difference between quantitative and qualitative, that quantitative is that positivist paradigm. It's more your scientific, it's going to create data, it's more objective in that respect. But it's not deterministic. It's not like, A is definitely going to lead to B. It's more probabilistic, whereas A may lead to B. There's a strong probability. Like take cancer, for instance, and cigarette smoking. We will say it's not deterministic in that not everybody that smokes is going to get cancer, but it is probabilistic that is really going to increase the chances that that will occur. So that's one thing that you do really need to remember when you're talking about quantitative research as far as being absolutes. There are no absolutes in research. Nothing is ever 100% going to say if you did this, this is what your outcome, is going to be. And the other just point to make about quantitative is that it is very temporal, that a cause will precede the effect in time. So therefore, when you're looking at relationships and empirical relationships, you do want to look and see if there are any other variables that could have occurred, at that time or after that time that somebody could be reading into what all is happening to create whatever it is that they're the effect that they're looking for. So just remember that there's really no absolutes whether you're doing research to prove anything 100%. So experiments are randomized controlled trials as they're like the gold standard as far as types of experiments to get that really good control manipulation, that objectivity, that and using randomization, make sure that every subject is equally guaranteed to be in a spot, that no one picked somebody because they had certain qualities, or anything like that. So we're going to discuss those things separately. So manipulation is doing something to study the participants. Experimenters manipulate the independent variable by administering a treatment to some subjects and withholding it from others, or by administering some other treatment. So the key points is that the researcher is going to manipulate the independent variable, and the dependent variable is the variable that this is acted upon. So that should have the effect of, or that will be the outcome. Okay. Whenever you see independent or dependent variables, you immediately know that that is then a quantitative research study. I really do want to point that out. Hypotheses also, those are in quantitative research studies. So the control group is necessary to be able to see if there is a difference, that if the made a difference in the group that got the experiment versus people that didn't get the experiment. And you can look at it in different ways of how they do control groups. They could give no treatment. There could be some alternative treatments or a placebo so that the person thinks that they're getting a treatment. It could be that they just have the standard treatment that was being done on, like if you're doing a test on a nursing unit, they would get, so it wouldn't be that they didn't have any treatment, they would just have what was standardized previously. Could be different doses, than what's being given to the other group, but anything like that could, impact how they do and handle the control group. Okay, randomization is when the involves placing subjects into conditions at random. So it would be totally, when you have your group, who's assigned to which group will be by just picking numbers out of a hat, or you can put their names in a computer and ask them to randomize them into two groups, and you can get sets that do that. And that's really your basic randomizations. And that's a really key point in working when you talk about validity and reliability of your testing, because that way you're not trying to control for certain characteristics, and chances are that they're being controlled automatically because of the randomization, and that if you have a large enough group, that you'll get a good balance in between the two groups. So randomization is the most reliable method of equalizing those groups. Okay. This is just an example of what your tables would look like if you were like going to just pull up some random numbers. And there's another example of a random assignment. Stratification is when you divide your groups before randomizing them. So you have permuted block randomization, which means that, like, say you wanted to look at different age groups. So you would have a block that you say pick out of your 9-year-olds, or a block you pick out of your 12 years old, so that you can guarantee that you will have X amount from a particular group in each group, so that you can stratify and then randomize from that stratified group, so that you have equal representation in that way. Blinding is interesting concept because you have single blind studies and double blind studies. When you do blinding, it conceals the information from the participants, the data collectors, care providers. Okay, single blinding would be that the study participants are blinded, but those that are studying the participants would know who was getting the treatment and who wasn't. Where double blinding is nobody knows, except it's all would be done through codes. So those delivering the treatments and those receiving the treatments would not know who was good and what. And that's really to remove any bias, because sometimes if you know who's receiving the treatments and who's not, sometimes your observations could be skewed just because of you knowing that information. So that's why blinding of studies also makes it a more powerful study. And here you can see for randomization, you screen, is somebody eligible to be in the study? And of course, if they're not eligible, they just get knocked out right then. If they're eligible, we always have to have informed consent. If they won't give consent, they cannot be in the study. And you get some baseline data, so you can find out some variables that may affect your study, like is it going to be difference with ages or marital status or education or anything like that. And then from the baseline data, you have your group, and you're going to randomly assign them. So the baseline data would be wanted to know. So if you want to stratify, if you notice you have you're doing 60 people and 40 of them have a college education and 20 of them don't, you may want to stratify that so you have 40%. Well, you can figure out that you'd want to try to get those percents the same amount in each group, so that education wouldn't be a variable that could possibly skew it. If you randomly assigned them, you could possibly get a higher education level on one side than the other just through the random assignment. So you can stratify in certain instances like that. But then once you just randomly assign everybody else so that each person has an equal chance of getting in, either the treatment group or the control group. And then you administer the interventions, and then you would collect your outcome data. So randomization is considered another really big strong point in doing research, and at your higher level of in that hierarchy, that it's a higher level of evidence to be more trustworthy. Okay, so you can see experimental design, so you can use some after post tests. You just do a test after the interventions administered, or you can do it before and after, where you do a test, then you administer the treatment, and then you do a post test. Or you can do crossover designs, which is more like a repeated measure, where you give the group one test now and then check it, and then you kind of reverse them, and the other group gets the test, and you keep them on control and see what happens in those kind of respects. They're usually very controlled in that respect. Like factorial designs, if you're doing more than one independent variable, like here we want to look at auditory and tactile stimulation in a neonatal intensive care unit. We also want to look at it at different times. So that's a factorial designs, because you're looking at auditory stimulation in 15 minutes and 30 minutes and 45 minutes in the infant participants, and then you're looking at tactile stimulations in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 45 minutes, so that you're getting, a lot of different, data coming in that you're looking at. And, you want to be able to differentiate which responses were from auditory and which responses were from tactile. So that would be an example of that kind of. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say, with that, but just, with randomized control, studies being the highest level, meta-analysis of a lot of randomized controls is your UPRA level of them. So if you take a bunch of these randomized that were done on the same interventions and you found that they were all finding the same things, that would be your absolute highest level when you think about looking at those levels that you did. Non-experimental designs now are a little bit different in that they are not going to be groups, but they're still considered quantitative because you're going to look for numbers. You're going to explain things more in objective terms, but they will be not as totally objective as doing an experimental research. They're more in your descriptive research and your correlation studies. Most of your nursing studies are non-experimental because we're dealing with human characteristics. And, those things can be like birth weight, ethnicity, whether somebody can be lactose tolerant or not. You really can't experimentally manipulate those variables. They're either there or they're not. But we can want to study the effects, say, of prenatal care on infant mortality. You wouldn't be right to withhold prenatal care from women to see the effects of giving prenatal care and not prenatal care. So again, you can't really deliberately assign a group. So you could go back and look at a group previously that didn't have the type of teaching that you may be doing now. So it's really hard. That's why you do more of your descriptive research or correlational cause probing research when you study the effect of the potential cause, but you can't manipulate it. So those are correlational designs because they still examine those relationships, between the variables. Remember, correlation is a relationship or association between two variables, so you still can have your independent and dependent variable, which you think that one is going to make a difference on the other, but you can't really study that effect. You can only correlate it and see, if it is giving a high correlation that if this is there, then this will most likely happen. It just really, again, this is where you really don't want to say cause and effect because it's not a direct experiment when you're actually manipulating a variable to see the effect. You're just looking at groups that have different innate variables like age or education or ethnicity or weight, height, anything like that. You're going to look at, do taller people play basketball or something like that. And you could take a class from students and see who your tall people are and then see if they're on the basketball team or something like that and see if there's a high correlation. Anyways, that's, pretty much what that is. So your descriptive studies can be where we observe, describe, and document aspects of a situation as it's naturally occurring. Again, we can go back to cigarette smoking and lung cancer. It's a descriptive correlational research to describe the relationship among the variables rather than to support any inference of causality. That's where you'll see in the literature how they say it's not cause and effect. It's really looking at the prevalence rate of that condition. Okay, so that's really key in that. And when you're looking at your chapter and getting ready to do some critiquing of quantitative research studies, these are some of the guidelines. You will be provided with the critique tool that you are to use, but always looking at these questions that are in the chapter because it just helps you start thinking about what is it that you really, want to know about the different types of experiments that you're looking at. Like if you are looking for a random control trial and you want to see, how one of those are written up. If you're looking for a quasi-experimental where they were not able to, randomize the participants into the two groups, or if it was a non-experimental where you weren't really manipulating an independent, but there were two variables and you wanted to look at the correlation between them. So these are the kind of questions you may want to look at when you're looking at your study. So just kind of review that. All right, well, that was chapter 9, and we're going to be, of course, moving on for a little bit more, but take a break